Dame Edna Everage is next up. She was a painfully shy and overweight schoolgirl, but in her grammar school cooking classes she produced an astonishing pavlova and performed Lady Macbeth with a strange and chilling maturity. Her mother resides in a, quote, maximum security twilight home, but kept Edna's school reports in the bottom of her locker.
Melbourne, Australia, somewhere in the 1940s. In the kitchen of a large house in a suburb called Moonee Ponds, a mother is preparing sandwiches for her daughter to take to school. The music on the wireless mingles with the sound of the piano in the lounge room, which her daughter, Edna, is learning to play. Edna May Beasley was a tall, shy girl with a dreamy, artistic nature and glasses. Later in life, Edna would marry a Mr. Norman Everage and would become internationally famous. She would also learn to overcome her shyness.
I know that a lot of people's school reports have just been thrown away, and indeed that could have happened to mine. Spookily enough, there's a big interest in my early life, not just from other people, but from me, because I'm writing my autobiography at the moment. So I've been delving around in the family archives, which happen, of course, to be in my mother's possession. God bless her, the darling, who is, of course, as you probably know, in St. Peter's Close. That's a maximum security twilight home in Melbourne. Most of her things, of course, were burnt the day she was whisked off to the Hossie, but a few things did survive, and I think some of my early records were amongst them because we found them in the bottom of her locker. And there they were. It was so spooky to see them again. I hasten to add, by the way, darling, that these school reports of mine are of great interest to an American University of Southwest Virginia, which has a huge archive of everything connected with me, including old bus tickets. And they've made me an enormous offer for these school reports. Isn't that spooky? Those things that are quivering in your hand now are worth thousands and thousands of dollars to an American university. It's uncanny.
What sort of school was it, Dame Edna?
Well, it was called the Moonee Ponds Girls' Grammar School. Church of England, of course. It had lovely grounds, a little bit bare because they chopped down most of the trees. The main piece of architecture in the school playground was what was called the shelter shed. What would you call that erection?
Something like a bike shed, would it be?
Bike shed. Well, it was a sort of a thing that not much happened in, but a fair bit happened behind. I think some of the naughty lasses smoked a few little ciggies there, and some have, exchanged anecdotes, which these days I suppose one might describe as a little bit raunchy. Hark at me.
Well, shall we have a look at some of the reports?
I've nothing to fear. I have nothing to fear.
Let's look at the 13-year-old Edna May Beasley. Edna's first term, the general report for this term. Edna is a painfully shy pupil, so it's hard to measure her potential.
Well,
very shy.
I was always a very nervous person. I think it was, in fact, my shyness that forced me to try to do something about it. Isn't that a paradox? But one I think that our listeners can probably understand. I had to pretend to be another sort of a person. I believe psychologists call it acting as if. I had to act as if I had all the confidence in the world. And by doing so, I came out of my shell a little bit more, Robert.
Yes, obviously, with great success. We can look at this English report here. Edna is a dreamer and seems to be in a world of her own. However, her confident reading of Lady Macbeth in our workshop production astonished us all. It had a strange and chilling maturity. Again, if she were not so painfully shy, I would prophesy a future in the theatre. A very perceptive teacher.
That must have been Miss Jennings, who I absolutely adored. I loved amateur dramatics. I just got a little bit of a taste for it, and Lady Macbeth was a part I absolutely adored, and I'd love to do it again. Jonathan Miller, as a matter of fact, has expressed a big interest in me playing the part in one of his wonderful, rather mould-breaking productions. I think she's a much maligned character, Lady Macbeth. She was just a housewife, coping as best she could with her husband having a bit of a nervous breakdown.
Were there any other teachers who were particularly perceptive? Anybody else who was a particular influence on you?
Miss Tonkin. I remember Miss Tonkin. I can't remember what her first name was. I think it was Pam Tonkin. I liked her, as a matter of fact. I suppose I had a little bit of a crush on her. She was a delightful woman, and she wore glasses, and so did I. And I think when you do wear glasses at school, you're a little bit on the outer. I always felt a little bit outside of what was going on. I felt always as though I was one of life's spectators, as though I was seeing things with a very special vision. It could have been just because I did need these prescription glasses. Boys did not play much of a part in my life. I never had much interest in them. I always think that we girls at a certain stage, certainly in our development, outstrip the boys and are more sophisticated and worldly. And the boys look so gawky and ghastly, don't they? With awful pimples and cuts on their knees. Of course, school dances later on. Someone would always buy me a gardenia and, I suppose, crush it to death when the lights went dim and they played Al Bowley singing Good Night, Sweetheart.
Good night, sweetheart. Sleep will banish sorrow. Good night, sweetheart. When we meet tomorrow.
Yes, that lovely melody does take me back to school dances many, many moons ago. I must tell you about my autograph book. I always had this little book with different coloured pages. It had a pink page and a pale blue page and a little pale green page. You know those books? Bound in imitation lizard skin, simulated goanna hide, humanely culled, I need hardly say. And girls used to write things, you know, by hook or by crook, I'll be first in this book. Roses are red, all that sort of thing. And I remember one of the girls wrote, "You have that spark, magnetic mark." And that was written in my book by a little lass, a contemporary of mine, though to look at her you wouldn't think so. She looks about 20 years older. A poor little waif.
Would this be the Madge McWhirter, who it says here in another journal report, her young friend Madge McWhirter seems
McWhirter's
to
a New
idolise
Zealand
her?
name, not a
Was
Maori
this
name.
the
It's
same
really
one?
a Scottish name. Yes, that was Madge Scottish people McWhirter. Settled in New Zealand. Poor souls. Madge McWhirter, who later married Douglas Alsop and became Madge Alsop and my bridesmaid.
Indeed.
And she's still a part of my life. I'm never going to shake her off. But she did bring something to Australia, though, that woman. She arrived, I remember, at school without a uniform, as like an orphan. Well, she was the only orphan I know who had parents still alive. And she was wearing this old New Zealand wool thing. It looked very homespun to me. It still had burrs in it, you know, and grass seeds, and between you and me, little bits of poo. Isn't that awful? Oh, I mean, she would have called it free range now. However, it was a horrible-looking shaggy thing, and they confiscated it. I mean, I'll never forget it, her sobbing there, and they put it on them. They actually burnt it, but they gave it a good shaking first, and you know, where they'd shaken Madge's twin set grew a kiwi plant of kiwi fruit, the first kiwi fruit ever in Australia.
Food, kiwi fruit, leads me on very nicely to another report here, Dame Edna. Third term. We were very proud of Edna having lost so much weight during the school holidays.
Do you have to read this?
We still feel...
Do you have to read this section of my report?
Sorry.
Can't this be edited out of the tape?
We still feel, however, that for a girl of her age, even though she is tall, 18 stone is a little excessive. It was, wasn't it?
Well, 18 stone in those days wasn't quite as excessive. I mean, people were bigger then. But I was a big girl, and I think it was a sort of unhappiness. I think it was the feeling of dissatisfaction that I was meant to be something, that Dame Nature had put me on the planet with some special purpose in mind, And I was in a state of confusion as to know what it was. What were the signals? I was trying to read the messages that Dame Nature had left.
Another report here, Dame Edna, domestic science. Edna cooks with confidence and verve. At the end of term, she produced an astonishing pavlova. She must now learn, however, to curb her enthusiasm for eccentric ingredients. What was all that about?
Food has always been an important part of my life, and my mother, of course, always made my lunches for me. And she was wonderful at exotic sandwiches, Vegemite and coconut and a little apricot jam, or tuna and Velveeta. That was a lovely combination. Most growing Australian kiddies used to patronise the Tuck Shop, which was run by Miss Longmire and her sister, the Mrs. Longmire. And there they had pies and pasties and sausage rolls, which I always used to adore. And they used to have a little sort of syringe, and you'd queue up and you'd order one, and they'd bring it out with a little oven mitt out of that little warming tray, and they'd put an injector into it and squirt tomato sauce under the crust. And so we'd stand in the playground in the hot Melbourne sunshine with the flies buzzing around us, eating these hot pies and pasties with the tomato sauce trickling down our wrists.
Could we go back to, let's say, the 14-year-old Edna Beasley? How do you look on her?
I can see a girl desperately unhappy in many ways, trying to find herself, not given a lot of encouragement at school. I think I just knew that a little seed had been planted in me, a bit like the kiwi fruit seeds that Madge McWhirter had inadvertently planted in that dusty school playground, that would grow later and flower into fruits the whole world wished to taste. In a way, perhaps the big headmistress in the sky is writing my report right now. I don't know if it says could do better. I still am a perfectionist, and every time I step off the stage or leave a television studio or even leave a hospital ward where I've been being absolutely gorgeous to people less fortunate than myself, I think I must do even better next time. And I hope there is a report being kept, because I do nothing if I do not try.
Could Do Better with Dame Edna was presented by Robert Booth and produced by Nigel Aitchison.